And that's exactly what information security investment is. It's not a return on investment. Rather, you're investing in protection so that you don't have a bad event happen where you're suddenly exposed, having bad publicity, people being harmed through their identities being compromised, whatever it might be.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The CyberSecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The CyberSecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. Hi, I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome Paul Hypki, CISO for Children's Minnesota.
Well, first of all, Todd, thanks for chatting with me today. But I've been in computer-related fields, data processing, we used to call it IT, for my entire career. About 20 years ago, we had a change in leadership at the company I was working with, and he said he wanted me to be the risk management officer, to which I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, I'll get back to you. So after about the fourth time, he said, basically, that means keep us off the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So that was my job description, and I did that successfully, by the way. So I got my feet in risk management. The information security officer reported to me at that time and started talking about how do we protect our businesses from information risk, but also there's a lot of other risk. And to a large degree, risk is risk. So an enterprise risk management to say, here's information risk, that is just as valid as operational risk, as regulatory risk, whatever other risk you might have out there. So trying to have a consistent risk approach is really what we were looking for. What I got in healthcare was basically because that job as risk management officer, international company decided it could be done cheaper from Singapore. So I was out looking for a job, and very providentially, I ended up in healthcare. I went from a service that took care of brokerages. So I went from what I used to call wealth and wellness to health and wellness. So it was a nice change in knowing that I was actually doing something I really felt good about. I was helping people to be healthy, for people to be healed, making sure that people were in better health rather than just making the rich richer is kind of how I felt about being in banking and brokerage all my career. So it was a very welcome change and something that I was rejuvenated, being able to work with a healthcare organization and help to protect that data. What I found, though, was moving from finance to healthcare was the huge difference in how they have approached security. Finance is very much leading edge. We were always buying the latest, greatest stuff, the newest toys, doing what we could to protect the data as much as we could. When I got to healthcare, it seemed that they didn't understand what security was all about. They understood what a malpractice suit would cost them, but they didn't understand the risk of not doing security well. So it's been a large amount of education of healthcare leaders and introducing things that I had done 10 years earlier in finance because healthcare was that far behind.
And I'm sure that you faced the budgets were just so vastly different between healthcare and finance. That must have been a really big shock for you.
Oh, a huge shock, because particularly in the brokerage area where I was the last few years, we needed to build a new data center, and we presented that to our clients, and they said, sure, and it was funded very easily. Trying to get a large expenditure in healthcare is much more difficult because there's not the sense of urgency. They don't understand how critical it is to their business yet. So there's not the easy funding that there was in the finance industry.
Yeah, so in finance, you're protecting the money, and people understand that when you lose money, what that means, right? I think exactly. I heard once somebody said that healthcare is just actually more challenging because when information gets disclosed, you can't just put it back. Where the banks, when you lose money, you just put it back. and everybody's whole, but you can't make somebody whole once you've disclosed their health information.
That's exactly it. And working for a children's organization now, which is even more passionate about their patients, it's exciting. I'm really worried about kids' identities because my credit card gets hacked on a regular basis. I get a call saying, we're closing your account, we're sending you a new card. It happens within 24 hours. When a kid's identity gets compromised, the hackers love it because they can potentially use that identity for years, because a kid's not going out and taking out a new loan or opening credit cards, so that the real owner of that identity is dormant and the attacker can use it for a very long time. So very high value on kids' identities.
Absolutely. We've had so many breaches out there where we have many kids' identities that have been exposed out there.
Yeah, it's really a concern. And then there's a lot of other information that's being used. I think the Chinese are gathering information so that they know who's target in their talents programs, where they're looking for people that they can hire into a Chinese-based business. With part of the agreement, they bring some intellectual property along. I think people that are primary targets for that are those that are in financial dire straits, which if you've got a very sick kid, you're going to have some financial difficulties. So they can also use our data to find who are good targets, who are the people that are doing our leading research, and really understand who they want to go after based on the data that they can steal from us or any other healthcare organization.
Sure. Absolutely. So you wrote a great piece for the CISO Compass book that was focused around determining your ROI, and you had that question of where's the ROI, and I loved your story. So why don't you take us through your story that you were faced with?
Sure. And like I said, I think it's very hard for our healthcare leaders to understand information risk. So I try to put it in terms that they can relate to. The organization I was with, we had a building that the facade was failing. And the concern was that some of the building materials on the outside could fall directly over the entrance and harm somebody. So very understandable risk. They acted very quickly because obviously you don't want someone dying because your building fell down or a piece fell off, and they committed millions of dollars to refurbishing, taking the existing structure down from, just the outside layer, and then rebuilding it so it was safe, but it would look exactly the same. So what happened was it actually went over budget by $1 million or so, but they were still happy because they now eliminated that risk of a piece of building falling off and killing somebody coming into a healthcare facility, which would have been terrible publicity. What I was able to do then is say, as we're talking about spending for security, what was the return on investment of replacing the exterior of that building for multiple millions of dollars? And they said, well, there was no ROI. It was eliminating risk. And I said, exactly. And that's exactly what information security investment is. It's not a return on investment. Rather, you're investing in protection so that you don't have a bad event happen where you're suddenly exposed, having bad publicity, people being harmed through their identities being compromised, whatever it might be. And I think that helped bridge that gap of understanding, it's not a return on investment item, it's a risk reduction item. It's like insurance. And I think that helped them understand that better.
And I liked what you did with that too, is that there was another event in the city that where the facade did fall, and I believe somebody was killed in that particular incident. And so
that's correct.
You leveraged that incident to your own organization and then extended that into security. Right.
And I think so much of our communication to our executives has to be in non-technical language. So I'm always trying to see how can I relate differently to our executives so they will understand what I'm concerned about. I had a meeting with our audit and compliance committee not too long ago, and I basically laid it on the line. We have a lot of things that need some attention. And one of the members asked me directly, are you telling me our hair is on fire? And I said, no, our hair is not on fire. It's not that. But if you think of us as a person, we are 250 pounds overweight. We're smoking 2 packs a day. We're binge drinking every weekend. Our cholesterol's high, and we're not doing anything about it. So the idea that we'll die tonight, it's possible, but not likely. But this is going to catch up with us. We are going to have consequences of our behavior and of not managing our health. And if we continue over the long term, it's going to be very significant consequences. And by putting it in a healthcare situation, someone who's not taking care of their body, help them understand, oh, this is not something that happens immediately. And the analogy taken further, we have to start exercising, but once you hit your target weight, you don't stop and regress. You've got to keep putting effort into staying healthy. And I think they understood that analogy very well.
It really is interesting how human nature is like that, how that's, the security sounds so logical to us because we're living and breathing this stuff every day, and we know these things need to be done. But we don't, we don't always connect with other people in the business because, they're dealing with a different reality and things that are logical to them. So it's kind of our job, right, to make those connections to something that they can relate to.
Right, and I think that's true of the communications both directions. Most of the people I'm talking with have strong healthcare education. A lot of them are doctors or nurses. And in the same way, when I leave the doctor's office, if they haven't translated into human terms for me, I have no idea what they said to me. And I have to remember how confused I feel leaving a doctor's office that didn't communicate well. That's the same confusion they have when we tell them all this good information, but they don't understand it because we didn't communicate it well.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers. Yeah, it's interesting. I was recently at the doctor, and they had done an MRI, and they said, "Oh, well, you need to come back in 3 weeks for an appointment." And then they sent me the medical the transcription from the doctor, and I read it, and it was all gobbledygook to me. I mean, I had no idea. It was all this medical stuff, and at the end of it, I was reading it, and I showed it to a doctor friend of mine, and I said, "Could you read this and tell me what this is?" And he reads through it, and he says, "Well, I think it's probably something you just have to watch." But he says, "I'm not that kind of a doctor in that specialty, so you'll have to go to your appointment." And so I'm still like confused, like, okay, what is it? Is this a big deal? Is this a little deal? And so it's in their own language, and I'm sure when I have that doctor's appointment, they'll clarify that for me. Is this a big deal? Is this a little deal? But I think our own profession is like that, right? We want to dump all the knowledge that we show that we have around this field, but they just want to know, is this a red, a green, or a yellow problem here, right?
Right. And then with that, when we present them with 10 reds, they go, well, which red is reddest? So I think we need to work on understanding how we can quantify risk better so we can really say, well, this one's kind of red, but this one's very red, and start putting that, once again, I like to get in financial terms, so I can start saying this one's going to cost you more than this one, more than likely. Mm-hmm. So a lot of work to be done in quantifying risk.
And what I liked about your piece about the ROI was that, it kind of struck me as there's a point when we have to be able to communicate that something is so important that we just have to do it. And it may cost X, and by the time we're done, it may be X plus 50%. But at the end of that, in the end of your story, they were actually okay with that. of spending that money to mitigate the risk because that's what it was going to take. And it's funny how all of a sudden the money will come from somewhere because they couldn't sustain the risk. And so I guess we do have to do a good job of saying, I like that idea. What is the reddest red that I really need to be concerned about today?
Right, because I think if we can communicate the risk effectively, we've basically done our jobs so that they are able to make a well-formed, risk-informed decision. Because that's essentially what our executives are doing all the time. They're making business decisions, taking risk into account. But if we don't inform them about the information risk, they may be taking a much, much more risk than they anticipated and not even be aware of it. So that's where we have to be very cautious and complete in our communication to them. And if they say, hey, I understand the risk, I understand that that's critical, but I want to go ahead, then that's their prerogative. But they're doing that knowing full well what they're getting into.
So what about somebody that's working in an organization where they have business cases and all the other projects are having to come up with some kind of ROI calculation, and now you're showing up with the security project that may not have a good ROI? How do you fit into that? Do you still calculate an ROI, or do you what's the right approach for that?
I think we need to work with finance on that, and it's probably going to be different for every organization. But basically, you can calculate the ROI. It's going to be negative. But I think it's really, we're not doing this because we're going to generate revenue. We're doing this because it's reducing risk. Every company has insurance policies. It's got to be seen the same as insurance, that this is a cost of doing business. This is something that we're doing because it's not likely we're going to have an issue tonight, but it's possible. And it's likely that within the next 5 years, we're going to have an incident. So we need to invest in this to allow us to continue doing our whatever our services to the community, whatever value we're providing out to the people that buy our products. We need to make sure we can continue doing that and not be interrupted by a security incident. So it's really got to be seen more as an insurance process, a way to ensure that we are going to be able to continue serving the community going forward.
Yeah, and I like the way that you've, that you came into security as well, that you came in from a risk management area into security. I mean, that's actually probably kind of a leading thing because most people are coming at it going in from a technology side into security. So do you think that that thinking has helped you frame the issue better?
I think it really has. I was a pretty strong technology guy because I was moving data centers when we merged banks and things. So I've got a good technical background, but I also have a strong communications tendency, and I want to be able to communicate things to people. And it just became very apparent that really security is a risk management discipline, because there are all these things that could happen. Just like when I leave here today in my car, I could be in an accident, I could run someone over, I could hit a tree. But what's the likelihood of those happening? And when they happen, what's the impact? What's it going to cost me? The same way, what's the likelihood of my data center blowing up? Today, it's pretty slim. What's the likelihood of us having to shut down because we have a worker strike where everyone's walked out? What's the likelihood that we have a supply chain event? So it's really just another risk management discipline where you're saying, what are the bad things that could happen? What's the root cause of those things happening? And what's the impact? If the impact is significant and the likelihood is too high, we need to work on either reducing the likelihood or reducing the impact, or doing a little of both.
Yeah, very, very good. And then, so there's been a lot of focus around, in reducing the impact of making sure that we, have better detection and better response these days. Seems to be around that whole impact, because the prevention is getting tougher every day.
The prevention is very difficult, and that's where we need to lean on people. I've been asked how many firewalls do I have, and well, we have 6,000 people, so I have 6,000 firewalls. It's getting a consistent set of rules out to all of them and having them apply them consistently is the difficulty. But it's really our people are our leading edge of protecting us, and the more we can educate them and get them on board, the safer we're going to be, because they're going to recognize things that no computer can recognize.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, do we calculate the ROI of each person with respect to security? Should we?
It would be an interesting exercise. I don't think we're ready for that. But if I can know that my finance people who have caught emails that were misdirected, basically one of our vendors got hacked, and the vendor's account actually sent us an email saying, please change the bank number that you're sending our payments to. If they hadn't been aware, if they hadn't caught that, we would have sent hundreds of thousands of dollars off to a bank, who knows what country, and we would have never seen it again. But because someone was aware and caught it, we avoided that kind of a problem. So we reduced our risk by training our people.
Well, this is very good information, Paul. And anything else that you'd like to share with us around ROI or risk management or your experiences?
Well, I think the key thing with ROI is getting to how much risk do I have and how likely is it to happen? So I can get to, if this happens every 10 years, what's that cost to me on an annual basis? I liken it to buying a car. If I buy a car for $30,000 and I plan to keep it for 10 years, it costs me $3,000 a year. If I have a security event that's going to cost me $10 million and it happens every 10 years, I'm looking at $1 million a year exposure. So that's not saying it's going to happen every year for $1 million, but when it does happen, if it's $10 million, I should be accruing that. And better yet, I should be saying, what can I do to reduce the impact, reduce it from a $10 million event to maybe a $5 million event? And what can I do to say it's not going to happen every 10 years, it's going to happen every 50 years? So that's a likelihood spread out. If I can take that $10 million event down to $5 million and spread it to 50 years, my exposure has gone down significantly.
Absolutely. I like that. I like that way of thinking. And it's not just, what is it going to cost us? But how can we, reduce that or spread out the time or, how often that event actually might happen.
Right. So if I can reduce that accrual by $100,000 a year by spending $25,000 a year on a tool to prevent it, I've actually got some ROI then.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Paul. This has been very insightful and very, very helpful, especially like your story and how we can tie those analogies to really make our security programs better. So thanks much for your contribution to the CISO Compass book. I think it really adds some nice color to the whole topic. And I really appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Well, and thank you, Todd, for gathering all of us that have these day-to-day experiences and pulling them into that one resource. We really appreciate that.
Well, thank you very much.
CyberReason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. CyberReason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cyberreason.com/CISO stories.